Well, hello there, Antioch. I'm with you today for our Fireside devotions, and I wanted to talk about one of my favorite Bible stories, or really one of my favorite stories in the Bible, one of my favorite people in the Bible, and his name is Elijah. And that's probably my favorite because I get to see a lot of reflections of myself, of my own feelings, and really even of my own insecurities in his story. If you're not very familiar, you can find everything about Elijah in 1 Kings 17, where he's this prophet, right? He's chosen by God. He's chosen by God to tell this evil king, evil queen, Ahab and Jezebel. Um, he's told to tell them that there's going to be a drought for about 3 years, and after he told them that, he ran away to a brook, a little stream, and he learned to trust God by being fed every day by some ravens, and he drank water from the brook until it really just ran dry from the drought. And then after that, God was like, "All right, Elijah, hey, go here now. There's going to be a widow," and he went there, and there's a widow, and he was like, "You're living with her now," and she's like, "Okay, well, I only have enough food for. I mean, this is my last meal for my son and I." And Elijah's like, "Well, if you trust me, trust God, and things will work out." And sure enough, they did. Um, Elijah's the flour and the oil, it never ran out. It was really miraculous. And while all of that was happening, her son got sick and died, and the widow was understandably upset. And Elijah prayed over him, and the son was brought back to life. And then after about 3.5 years of following God and being kind of alone, Elijah was told to go back to King Ahab. And Elijah said, he went to King Ahab and he said, "I'm the only prophet left. There's just me. You've killed all the other followers of the one true God, and I'm the only one left." And then he challenged King Ahab to round up all of the other cultists of Baal, and they had like a challenge, and they wanted to see how Baal could stack up, Elijah challenged them to see if Baal was as strong as God is. And so they had this challenge where they had to offer a bull to Baal and to God. And Elijah was like, "All right, you cultists, you go first." And so they built this altar with some wood, and they're like, whichever God sets fire to it, that's the winner. And they kind of went a little crazy. Elijah was off on the side taunting them, being like, "Yo, you got to be louder. Baal can't hear you." And they got louder and crazier and louder, and eventually they were up there dancing on the altar, cutting themselves with their blood dripping down. It's probably pretty metal. But Elijah, when it was his turn, he sat and he prayed. And it says, he prayed like 63 words. And then all of a sudden, fire just comes down. Bigger fire than this down here. And fire comes down and it consumes the altar, consumes the bull. It says it consumes the rock and the water that was there as well. And because things are this way at this time, it was a life and death thing. So all of the 450 prophets of Baal were slaughtered. Just killed, rounded up and killed because, they were worshiping a false god, an idol, and it was a big victory. And you gotta assume that's a big victory. And on top of that, Elijah was like, "Hey, God just told me rain's coming, and the drought's about to end." And sure enough, it was. And Elijah told the king, "Hey, you probably should get off the mountain and go back home. Otherwise, you'll be stuck here in the rain." And so King Ahab did that. And just as Elijah had this huge victory, and he showed how powerful God is, King Ahab returns to Jezebel and tells Jezebel everything that just happened with Elijah, everything that Elijah said, everything that Elijah did. And Jezebel sent a message to Elijah, and she just said, "I'll kill him. I'll kill you dead. I'll kill you if I see you. I'll do it tomorrow." And when Elijah got this message, he runs away. In fact, he runs into the wilderness and he prays for his life to be over. And when I hear this, it's an odd thing. But have you ever done something and have been really proud of something, and then with someone just saying a little thing to you just ruins it? Has that ever happened to you? I remember when I was a kid, I was playing this game, Super Mario 64. It was on the Nintendo 64. And there was a level with like clocks, and you had, depending on like what time of the game time that you went in there, the level was different, and it was confusing and hard for an elementary school kid to wrap my whole brain around how this worked. And I really struggled to beat this level. I played it for several days, and finally beat it over the course of a weekend. I was pumped, man. I was super excited. And I got back to school, and I told one of my friends that I finally beat it. And he's like, "Oh, that level's so easy. How could you struggle with that? Oh, that's not even hard at all. That's not impressive. This is what's impressive." And, I just felt like, oh, well, I must suck. I felt small and little. I remember when I was in high school, I felt the call from God to enter into full-time ministry. And I told some people that, and I was told, well, hey, make sure you get a real job too. And well, have fun being poor, or well, I wouldn't be too sure just yet. That doesn't really seem right. And I remember having a lot of doubt about myself, and if really that was something that God was calling me to. And with the story, Elijah had just proved that God was stronger. He had just proved that God was bigger. He was just proved that God is better than Baal. He just proved all of these things. But the next time he is threatened, he runs off into the wilderness and asks to die. And obviously, God isn't going to let him just die. Like, that's not a thing that God is going to do. And God sends an angel to Elijah, and he's like, hey, eat this cake, drink this water, rest some more. Next day, the angel comes back, eat this cake, drink this water. Now go hike for 40 days. And Elijah goes on a 40-day, 40-night hike into the wilderness, and he eventually comes to this mountain. And as he climbs up the mountain, goes into a cave, we're going to read from 1 Kings 19, verses 9 to 18. And God, he just starts off, and he says, "But the Lord said to him, 'What are you doing here, Elijah? What are you doing here, Elijah?' After running 40 days and 40 nights and being sent off into the wilderness by an angel, God asks him, 'What are you doing here, Elijah?' Elijah replied, 'I have zealously served the Lord God Almighty, but the people of Israel have broken their covenant with you, torn down your altars, and killed every one of your prophets. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too. Go out and stand before me on the mountain,' the Lord told him. And Elijah stood there, and the Lord passed by, and a mighty windstorm hit the mountain. It was such a terrible blast that rocks were torn loose, but the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake there was a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire there was a sound of a gentle whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And a voice said, 'What are you doing here, Elijah?' And Elijah replies in the same way. He said, 'I have zealously served the Lord God Almighty, but the people of Israel have broken their covenant with you, torn down your altars, and killed every one of your prophets. I am the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me too. And then the Lord God told him, go back the way you came. Travel to the wilderness of Damascus. When you arrive there, I want you to appoint Hazael, king of Aram, and then anoint Jehu, grandson of Nimshi, to be king of Israel, and anoint Elisha, son of Shaphat, from the town of Abel Meholah, to replace you as my prophet. Anyone who escapes from Hazael will be killed by Jehu, and those who escape Jehu will be killed by Elisha. Yet I will preserve 7,000 others in Israel who have never bowed down to Baal or kissed him. Elijah felt overwhelmed and alone. Even when he could see God at work just days before, he felt overwhelmed and alone. And I wonder how much we feel that way. I wonder how many of you feel that way. I know, I'm reminded of Hebrews 12, where the writer, the author, he starts and says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith, let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up. And let us run with endurance the race God has set before us. We do this by keeping our eyes on Jesus, the champion who initiates and perfects our faith. So often in our lives, when big things just pop up, they're big and they're scary, and they yell at us and they shout at us, hey, look at me, pay attention to me, focus on me, worry about me, look at me. And God is saying, God has told us, hey, run your race. And the race that's set out before you, and the way you're going to do this is by focusing on Jesus, keeping your eyes on Jesus. And Elijah was focused on God. Elijah was focused on God when he had to depend on God for food, from the ravens, from the widow. He was focused on God when he had to depend on God to show up for the sacrifice. But then, when the death threats came, he got a little overwhelmed. So we have this big thing looming over our heads right now. And some people are freaking out. Some of you might feel lonely. I personally, I don't really know what to do with myself at night. I had this routine of almost every night of the week being something. Whether that was hanging out with friends, whether that was a Bible study, whether it was youth group, whether it was the elders and board meetings. I had something in the evenings where I saw and interacted with people. And, when it came to some of the meetings, sometimes I didn't want to go there. But now, it's like, hey, can we? I miss you guys. I miss seeing people. And I can now basically count on one hand the number of people that I get to see and interact with every single week. And that is, it is crazy. It is weird. And honestly, it's hard. It is very difficult to be so alone. But like Elijah, even though I might feel alone, I am not, and you are not. Our schedules are kind of weird right now. So I would just ask, in this time where there is a lot of chaos, but then there's also just a lot of time to be alone, that we would take some of that and use the silence that we're almost forced into to focus on God, to focus on where he is. Elijah out on the mountain There was an earthquake, there was fire, there was wind. But God spoke to him in the silence. So I think we'll be pretty amazed at what we can hear when we just sit. I love you guys. I miss you guys. I am very anxiously looking forward to when we can get back together as a big church body again. For right now, in the foreseeable future, it's not going to happen. So if there's anything you need, please reach out to the church. Please reach out to us. We will do our best to meet needs as safely and as quickly as we can. So love you guys. God bless, and we'll see you tomorrow.